Welcome to the Cosmic Dispatch, a show about bodies, celestial and earthbound, time, experience, and the relationship between all of them. I'm your host, Cory Nakasue, and good afternoon. Hope you're all well on this first day of Gemini season. The sun entered Gemini very early this morning, and now we are officially in the beginning of the end of spring. And I used to be such a summer person when I was younger. And as I age, I'm finding it entirely too hot. And I'm wishing spring would last longer. And I know it's not just me and aging. Summers are actually getting hotter. So I'm really going to try to relish this last bit of spring, this last bit of temperate weather. And while the physical weather might be more temperate, at least here in Kingston, New York, definitely not in Canada or the Northwest, but the astro weather also is still very, very hot. And today I have my friend Jillian Sweeney here with me live in the Radio Kingston studio to join me not only to talk about the transits of the week, but also to welcome Gemini season. Today, I'd like to talk about Gemini from a more lunar perspective and a more embodied perspective. Um, what does it feel like? What does Gemini feel like? How do we connect with this sign in a way that's more sensual or emotional or kinetic? How can we connect with this sign, the underbelly of this sign, in a way that's not just purely intellectual or talkative? Because I do think it is a sign of great physical energy and even depth, if you want to go there. I mean, before we even start, I want to put out there that this stereotype of Gemini being superficial or just skimming the surface of things or multitasking without a purpose or any conviction does Gemini, the whole archetype, I think, a disservice. And of course, it can express that way very easily. But if we don't challenge some of these like easier reads on Gemini, we're going to miss a lot of Gemini's hidden depths and maybe even some of Gemini's darkness. Um, so I want to do that today. And we'll see if my friend Jillian Sweeney with her Gemini moon can help us find some of these other ways of being in relationship with Gemini. So, welcome, Jillian.
It's good to be here, Cory.
And tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're into these days.
My background is primarily in dance and movement. Grew up dancing on the dance team, going to the studio, learning the steps, learning the moves. So my first language, I think, is probably more movement based than language based. But I also am a great lover of language, books, reading, writing. Um, And when I moved to the Hudson Valley back well, full time back in 2018, it was in building a relationship with the land up here and the weather up here. And um, following the seasons that I started to really get into divination as a practice, which is kind of a Mercury thing, um, and getting into astrology and learning how to work with the signs and the symbols as a way to build my own narrative within myself and kind of, I don't know, dialogue with both community, people, but also nature.
Mm.
I tend to like to hang out by the creeks to get some information. So that's a little bit of where I come from.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I'm happy you're here. And before we get into the body, or I should say bodies of Gemini, it's a double bodied sign. And take a look at the week ahead. Got to do a little bit of housekeeping. Just want to remind you that you can share your astrological experiences and musings, ask questions, and give us show and guest recommendations by emailing us at thecosmicdispatch@gmail.com. And you can stay up to date with all of the Cosmic Dispatch content on our Instagram. And if you think you'd be a great guest or you have something you'd like to talk about through an astrological lens or a project you'd like to promote, go ahead and reach out. Mandy Sheeler will be there on the other end to collect your info and questions. And you can also sign up for our monthly newsletter, which includes monthly horoscopes, moon reports, bonus content, and information about workshops and consultation schedules. And subscribe to the Cosmic Dispatch on Instagram. On not a, I mean, follow us on Instagram, but subscribe to the Cosmic Dispatch on YouTube. This is a new thing. We're filling out our Cosmic Dispatch channel, and that's really great if you're a visual person or if you'd like to read along with a transcript. So that's all there for you. And let's jump in and do this, Jillian. The sun entered Gemini today, this
Mhm.
morning, early. And as soon as it did that, it formed a trine to Pluto in Aquarius. And at the moment, Pluto is part of a fixed T square with Mars and Jupiter. Um, so, this fixed T square is something that was initiated last week and it's still in play. And there are parts of this T square that are actually still building. So, for those of you who are like, what the hell's a T square? A T square is made up of two planets making a 90-degree angle with a focal planet. And then those two planets make a 180-degree opposition to each other. So if you were to draw a line between all those points, you would get a triangle. And T squares are aspect patterns that hold a tremendous amount of energy. And having a square, having a T square in fixed signs, which is what we have, to me, it looks like an impasse or a showdown where nothing's moving, no one's backing down. It's holding that energy. And one of the ways to creatively work with the T square is to find an outlet point or a place to discharge that energy. One of the ways would be to look for the missing sign of the same modality. In this case, that would be Scorpio, and trying to find a way to work with Scorpio as a means of breaking a deadlock. But another way is to look for a planet that makes an easy aspect, like a trine or a sextile in the T square. And that's what we have here. That's what we have today. So that sun in Gemini got pulled into this T square. Any thoughts about that,
Mm,
Jillian?
mm. So it's making a trine, which I think of as sort of an aspect of the dance or something easier.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Um, in Hellenistic astrology, the trine is akin to Jupiter, which is going to be beneficial. Um, so when the sun moved into Gemini, there is this sense of illuminating or talking about maybe some of the struggles we've had over the last week, especially as this T square is in formation and working in the sky. And it's also powerfully resourced because Pluto is pretty dang powerful, as the underworld god and bringing us some root strength. So I'm thinking root chakra strength, at your tailbone, and the power of that to move out, you know. And also there is a sense of maybe Pluto kind of has the connotation of purging. So we're in air signs, Gemini and Aquarius. So maybe we're clearing some cache, cache memory, as in on your computer cache. So we have a
mm.
little bit of space to move around now where we might have felt a little bit pinned down.
Yeah,
So it's helpful, I think, overall.
absolutely.
Breath of fresh air.
Yeah, definitely. I'm kind of seeing, you have Jupiter, Pluto, and Mars. These are like powerful, heavy hitting planets, and they're in these fixed signs. And that feeling of being locked and or stewing or holding or just building tension but not really releasing it.
Mhm.
And I almost see this sun in Gemini. For any of you who've ever watched Friends, I don't know if you've ever watched Friends.
Yeah.
I kind of think of the sun in Gemini as Chandler Bing
Uh-huh.
coming into the room
Yeah.
and like just saying some stuff, and
Yeah.
everyone just kind of stops and looks and goes, what? Like they break that intensity,
Yeah.
and this random or non sequitur thing comes in, and it kind of shakes things up and confuses things for a second enough to, get out of that thing that you were holding. um and just come in like with some levity or something new, or just to or a shift
Uh-huh.
in the energy. And so I think of Gemini energy as Chandler Bing energy. And I know I was saying, oh, we need to find other ways of thinking about Gemini, and that's such a
Typical.
it's such a typical one.
I was trying to do the clap,
And then
the friends
what?
clap.
Yeah, it's so I like that this is coming in, and
Yeah.
it's just, it's an encouraging, it's like a mediator also walks into the room and says, okay, everybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
let's try to find a different way of like thinking about it, talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just a different angle. And also what Gemini can do is like, have you looked at it from this angle? Have you looked at it from that angle?
Mm-hmm.
And whether these three want to or not, there's an influence now, and you can reach out to. You can stay in the deadlock, but now there's an option,
Yeah.
which is nice.
It is nice. The welcome distraction as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. But I also like, yeah, breath of fresh air. And so last week Jupiter and Pluto perfected their square in the T square, and Mars in Leo perfected its opposition yesterday. And then coming up on the 23rd, Mars perfects its square to Jupiter in Taurus. And so, kind of peeling off some of the layers of the T square, any thoughts about Mars and Jupiter
Mm.
approaching
Mm-hmm.
their exact square?
Um, I mean, asserting some beliefs, hopefully coherent ones, hopefully ones that you believe like that are central to you on a personal level. It gives me a sense of kind of a summer swagger coming along, maybe a spring swagger, I guess, because it is still spring. Um, but there's a good physical energy behind it, but it is quick, and it can, the downside of that is you can move a little too quickly with too big of a thought,
Mm.
you know the overconfidence, the if you're not centered, the overconfidence can, maybe be something in the long term that's not great for you.
Yeah, it's like that, like overextending.
Yeah.
It's, with Jupiter and Mars, and especially in those signs, especially with Mars in Leo, there can be this sense of course I can do whatever I want. I can do that thing that looks really hard that I've never tried before. Sure.
Sure, I'll do
That I
it.
haven't prepared for. I can do that. And then overextending,
Hmm.
or, with Taurus, especially when we think about Taurus in terms of economics, it's that I can afford that. Or
Sure.
I'll put it on the credit card. And yeah, I know I have some checks coming in. I think I can cover that, but it's that overextension. I also think of Jupiter in Taurus and squared Mars in Leo. I almost get this sense of like super yin against super yang. And not that the yin, the Taurus yin, is passive. It's it's a powerful yin that wants to just kind of pull everything in and magnetize everything and hold on to it and just like really ensconce itself.
Hmm.
And then the Mars and Leo is just super expressive.
Uh-huh.
And then to have those two, it's sort of like the irresistible force and the immovable object kind of a
Hmm.
thing. And then it's like, you know, it could be an impasse, or it could also just be a big push, an overexertion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in there. So we're hoping that people will reach out to Gemini if you're feeling those types of things.
Mediation.
Mediation, please. And then any thoughts about Mars in Leo?
Um,
That's new. That just
yeah.
perfected yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a huge change. In Hellenistic astrology, there's a dignity change from being in
Hmm.
fall in Cancer, which isn't, necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't always feel great to have sort of the Mars energy in the family, kind of like, these sort of like the sign of Cancer being keeping it in the family, and having to, you know, not be able to express what you want to express. And then moving into Leo, where it's all about expression. There's like kind of this is another, I think, breath of fresh air. It can also look like somebody challenging authority figures, like Leo is the sign of the sun. So it can
Hmm.
be a little rebellious for the good or for the bad, or for, it has this sort of prideful, assertive quality to it.
Yeah. And you said a little earlier, summer swagger.
Yeah.
It's that yeah, so Mars wants to move and express and maybe even go up against. And then in the sign of Leo, um, I really imagine Mars just doing everything it can to assert its centrality and not wanting to give up. It's like things of like, yeah, centrality, position. Like, I belong here at the center or at the helm or at the front. Don't get in my way. And also, it's Leo's a fixed sign. And so for Mars, with all of its power to be wanting to assert these things, it's not like this movement like through Aries or Sagittarius. It's I want to position myself here for all time.
Yeah. I'm at the front of the parade here. Like
Yeah.
I'm
And I'm
leading the
and
charge.
with Leo, we're talking about things like legacy and the things that come out of you that you create that have your personal stamp on it, that was supposed to last forever, like, rage against the dying of the light type of a thing. And so I think, if people, while Mars was in Cancer, have been feeling like they didn't get to shine, or they didn't get to say their piece, or be recognized as an individual in some way, it's going to come out now. And so just something to think about if you're dealing with those kinds of energies,
Right.
like,
And how was your Mars in Cancer time? Like, how is that going to get expressed? You
mm,
know, like, what's that story?
yeah, fun times.
Fun times.
And so this is like the early part of this week. Now into the early part of this week, we're going to be getting that, like, part two, I think, of the T Square story, or I was calling like a soap opera. It's like, oh, what's next? So yeah, what's going to happen with Mars and Jupiter? We'll see. It'll be big. And speaking of big, and speaking of Jupiter, also, there was just so much going on last week. I didn't get to dig into Jupiter and Taurus as much as I wanted to. And I know that's going to be a year-long excavation, but you have Jupiter and Taurus
I
natally.
do. Yes.
And what, yeah, what's your experience with that?
I often think about opulence when I think of Jupiter and Taurus. There is, you know, the living in the mountains and the grand opera of the beauty of the expanse of like living in nature for me is it's sort of my vision of um the expansiveness of what nature can teach us. It's also, I think a lot about, for me, Jupiter is in my ninth house. So this idea of teaching, teachers, spiritual questing. I have a lot of female teachers in my life who are really important to me, and people that are mentors like you are, that are Jupiter kind of represents that in my own chart as a signification. Um, and I was also thinking about, there's been a lot of astrologers talking about looking at the Jupiter cycle because it's every 12, it goes through the sign once a year. So 12 years ago, what was going on? So 2011, what was going on? And I remember that was the time I went on a vision quest with a bunch of ladies and we like built a sweat lodge together and sang in the woods. So, I mean, I don't know if you could get more Jupiter in Taurus than that. So,
Wow, that's perfect.
which eventually led to me living here, by the way, in the Hudson Valley. So
So that
that
was,
that
oh,
was
I didn't know that.
yes, yes, yes. And it was we were all women. It was one of my a female mentor named Milene Margoleth, who can sing like nobody's business. And then we go in a sweat lodge and we just sweat it out and sing it out.
Wow.
Yeah, naked too.
Okay. Wow. Even more. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that is so like it hits all the bases with Jupiter in ninth house, teaching, learning, being inspired, developing a philosophy, and nature as teacher,
Totally.
nature as belief system and inspiration. And so so that's how Jupiter and Taurus can look for some people. And also, yes, if you're trying to figure out this next year with Jupiter and Taurus, think back 12 years ago and think about what was happening that year. And not that this year is going to be like an explicit
Repetition or
yeah,
recreation.
but there will be themes and there
Mm.
will be echoes of what happened 12 years ago. And maybe, you'll pick up where you left off with something. But you're looking for the threads. And if you look, I'm sure they're there. Um, we are going to take a short break. And when we come back, more with Jillian Sweeney.
.org.
You're listening to the Cosmic Dispatch. I'm your host, Cory Nakasue. And with me in the studio today is, I'm going to call you a multidisciplinary artist
That works for me.
and multidisciplinary diviner, even. Very
Yes.
Gemini.
Yes.
It's a very Gemini things. And we finished up this week's astro forecast. I also want to add, just to add to this Mars thing before we move on to Gemini. On the 26th, Mars makes a square to the lunar nodes. That's another T square. Just wanted to throw that we're dealing. Yeah, the Mars in Leo energy is new. It's part of that first T square, and it's also squaring the nodes. Um, and the nodes are, where how we derive our eclipses. Um, and so I, things are spicy. Things are going to be spicy this week. So yeah, I would reach out to that sun newly in Gemini and try to find the levity, try to find, maybe force yourself to find alternative ways of looking at things, because I don't think that urge is going to come naturally. People are going to be pretty set in whatever it is they think they want to do. They're going to be set in how they think they want to look at things. But that Gemini energy is there for you, but you have to engage it. So, yeah, that's the week. But let's let's switch gears a bit and talk about Gemini, since we have 4 weeks of Gemini coming up. And I want to talk about Gemini from the embodied perspective. I've talked a lot about Gemini and I've written a lot about Gemini from as many different perspectives as I can. And if you're still wanting to understand Gemini in maybe a more traditional way or an introductory way, I would listen to last year's content during Gemini season. I think I even did like a Gemini 101 or a Mercury 101. But today, I just want to find, like, I hope we all do this week, like, try to find another way into a situation that you think you already know really well or that you've done to death, because things need to be, you know, broken up a little bit so things can move, which is one of, you know, Gemini's like main reasons for being is to move things. So, so let's celebrate some Gemini season. And as someone, so Jillian, you have the moon in Gemini natally. What does that feel like?
Hmm. Well, I also have a night chart, which simply means that the sun is at the bottom of my chart. And I also have the moon at the very top of my chart. So I have a moon kind of chart too. So seeing by moonlight. And I think there's a big difference between a night chart consciousness and maybe a sun type of consciousness. So, with the sun in Gemini that we've already been talking about, there is this doing and being motivated by multitasking, Gemini stuff like being in the fray of communication or pulling out information or tinkering with information. You're getting good at communication, you're doing things like radio shows, you're prioritizing the action of Gemini content. With Moon in Gemini, it's really way more about reflective qualities, dreamlike qualities, memories, imagistic and symbolic unpacking, right brain pattern building or right
Mm.
brain pattern seeking, mother care. We hear the word flux a lot and change a lot with the moon. And it also, really important, kind of reveals the environment that we like to be in, that we're comfortable with. So often the household that you grow up in, or the people you like to surround yourself with, or the ideas you like to surround yourself with would have that Gemini quality.
Okay. But how does it feel for you?
Me?
Like, what are some things that you like, you're living your life, you're having experiences, and you make the connection of, oh, that that's a lunar Gemini thing.
hmm hmm Well, I have to say that I surround myself with Gemini people. My mother is a Gemini sun, and our house was just full of activity. I mean, everything from like my mom was in school at one point, we were watching TV, she raised a lot of animals, there were cookbooks everywhere. There was always something to be doing. Like, so I grew up in sort of this like, she was always interested in the news. So I feel really comfortable in environments where people are chatty and talkative.
Mm.
My ex-partner is a Gemini. Like two of my best friends from grade school, Geminis. I get along really well in the in like the storytelling and chatty kind of world. And I also think I brought it into um, the need to move through the world and not necessarily um I wasn't as interested as a Gemini moon in the content say of things. I was really interested in how this connected to that and how I could move through it. And I think my choreographic mind and the way that I work in rhythms through movement, I think that has more of a Gemini moon feel to
Mhm.
it. And it's also um, a little bit like being taken around rather than taking myself around, if that makes sense. Like, I love to improvise more than I like to learn a phrase in dance. And phrasing, is something I grew up with, but I would much rather improvise.
Mm. Well, so I know Jillian from dance and from improvisational dance. And for at least a few years of meeting regularly and doing dance improvisation, um, like every single time I have probably said at some point, I hate this. I hate this. And Jillian is so good at it. It's so natural. I have Mars and Saturn in Gemini. I want the phrase so that so Saturn and Gemini, I want the structure. I want to know the dynamics. I want to know the foundations of things. I want to understand it. And then once I'm in it, I'll I'll deviate from it and everything, but I do not want to make this up on the fly. And the only reason I like did it for the few years that I did was because I was dancing with some amazing, amazing artists. It was like they were the best. Um, but that's like Moon and Gemini, like you're gonna be like happy as happy as a clam. Like I'm sure I could do better, but like that's your element.
Yeah. A lot of talking about feelings, but maybe not feeling the feelings as well.
Thank you, because I was going to ask you, okay, emotions. Like just because you have your moon in Gemini doesn't mean you don't have emotions, but
No.
it's the way you process and the way you deal with them.
Yes. Sitting with them is not how I deal. Although I've learned as I've gotten older that that is very important to do.
It's like I can I have moon in Scorpio, so that's a whole other thing, but I can imagine moon in Gemini would be something like you feel the feeling and the way you're in relationship with it is um let me name these things. Like what, like let me write this down,
100%.
can find a paradigm or
Oh my,
something to plug them into so I can then whoop, go understand it up here.
very much so. The act of naming is so huge for me. Um, because it gives a sense of intention because I love it's not that I don't love the language content, I just love the act of the language itself. So the naming process for me, and people have to kind of go with me on that sometimes. You know, I can be pretty chatty.
Yes, I do know. but but also like going back to the body, because I
Mhm.
had a remembrance of like the many times we've been in conversation like physically, and it's the the phrase that comes to mind is impressionable body.
Mm.
And that is like moon in Gemini for me. And I think we were doing an exercise at some point and I had my hands like on your shoulder blades, and I gave you a cue or I gave you an image or I just asked you to think of something, and I felt that thought in my hands shift throughout your body, and I was like it's so impressionable, which is why I think you also like improvisation. Like everything that you see, hear, come into any kind of contact with, it immediately expresses as movement. Like you can take that
Mm.
in so like
Mm.
and riff off of everything that's around you in the moment. And that's my experience of your
Mhm.
moon in Gemini. Whereas I have some clients that work with the body as well as astrology. I have one client I'm thinking of in particular. She has a bunch of Taurus and Scorpio, a lot of fixed stuff. If I gave her an image, I would feel nothing change. Like this person needs like some tactile, like
Yeah.
hard movement to get some things to shift. But with you, I almost felt like
Mhm.
what, like there wasn't anything sticky. In fact, like it was all always a little bit in motion,
Mhm.
and the slightest shift in your thought or your energy or something you see would like just your whole
Mm.
body would just like slide. It was like totally fluid.
Mm.
So
Aw, I'm feeling
that's
so seen right now
really
and mirrored. Yeah, it is like a mirroring thing for, the moon as a mirror. It's making me think about how thought becomes a mirror for in like outer world to inner world, and then the dance between those two things.
so. What are some practices that you find helpful or that you employ when you have difficulty with all that movement and shifting?
I have been thinking a lot about the signs that are next to Gemini. So we just came out of Taurus, and then after Gemini is Cancer. And, you know, Gemini being this sort of intermediary, communicative, thought provoking, like interested in thought, and verbal cues. That the act of listening, which I kind of gather from Taurus, the stillness, the listening, the sensual communication on one side, and then to the other side would be Cancer, which is the caring and the moving into the gushy heart space. Even if it's known for its protective shell, the crab without its shell is moving around with its own body as its communication vessel. And so, finding care, and like finding love and seeking love and care and finding a way to listen to what's going on are ways to ground, what could be a very bird-like flighty energy in Gemini. And in, astrology, these are places where I think of as holding hands. Um,
Mm,
um,
that's
we can't
nice.
see what's next to us, but we can hold the hand of, the Taurus, and we can hold the hand of the Cancer and gather information and also find help and support. And we often might want to like jump off and go somewhere else or be distracted um find ourselves in a little dark place that we didn't expect. That those forms of being in a body and caring for your heart space, I think, are really important. And that's just one piece of advice. There's so many other things, but it's just a way I think about.
No, that's really good for, anyone who has a lot of Gemini energy coursing through them, through their chart. A lot of Gemini placements is try to to reach out to other people or other things in your own nature because they're there. But if we don't develop the relationship with them, then then it doesn't happen. Like there are things in our lives that we have an easier time building relationship with, and then we tend to avoid the ones that are harder. But it's really worth it to make the attempt to bring these other things that are a little uncomfortable into our lives to help us out with the stuff that we're really
Mhm.
actually strong and maybe gifted with. It
Mhm.
still has
And I think that
its shadow.
those friends on either side that I'm talking about can be people. They can also be activities. They can be, if you're thinking Taurus activities, like any kind of body work or body care for a Gemini is probably really good for them,
Yeah.
you know?
No, excellent advice, Jillian. We need to take a short break, and when we come back, more about Gemini stuff. You're listening to the Cosmic Dispatch. I'm your host, Cory Nakasue, and with me in the studio today is Jillian Sweeney, multidisciplinary artist and diviner. And so we talked a little bit about, writing and dance. And I think of dance as a Gemini thing. I know Pisces gets dance a lot, but I definitely Gemini. Come on. And the multidisciplinary diviner hat, like I know you study astrology and other things, tarot
Hmm.
and the I-Ching.
And the I Ching, yes.
And I thought we'd bring the I-Ching into the conversation because I don't have a deep understanding or practice with it, but I play with it. But the primary study of the I Ching is movement,
Mhm.
how things move and flow and shift and change. And so I was wondering if you would tell us a little bit about your I Ching practice.
Mhm. Yeah, well, the I Ching means the book of changes. I mean, rough translation there. Um, I came to the I Ching actually before I really started to study astrology because I was having issues around relationships. I was having a hard time wrapping my consciousness and probably my Gemini qualities around how to change my mind about how I was seeing my life. What was my personal narrative? And I looked to the I Ching as a divination book that I could ask questions like a friend. I toss the coins, I get 6 lines, I get a hexagram, and then there's a whole write up on that hexagram. And I could ask a question and get some kind of answer that really kind of, you were talking about Sun in Gemini at 0 degrees, trining Pluto. It's like you might be experiencing some pain, but hey, what about this angle? So when I would, go to the I Ching, it was really honestly, it was from this place of wanting to open myself up to other ways of thinking about what I was going through, be it a relationship issue, I was lonely, or I was just going through things. Things were so, I found myself in kind of this Gemini body, Gemini moon space of needing a lot of rest. And so
Mm.
this came in during that time, about 2018. So about 5 years ago. I've also concurrently been studying Qigong, and I'm currently learning all of the acupuncture channels.
Mm.
So they relate so well to a lot of what's going on with the way the I Ching sort of works. So the I Ching is a book of language. You're going to get some fortune telling words like see a great person, this is misfortune, pitfall. You see all these words in the I Ching, but I think it's really good to remember that the I Ching was, before it was a book of any kind of languaging or words, it was actually just symbols, just signs. Think about how we look at traffic signs and we see a stop sign. It's like hexagonal, it's red, it says stop. It says a lot of things to us. Could be a four-way stop. um, so the I Ching is made up of these symbols called gua, and gua simply means shape or to hang up. So that would mean you hang it up for the people to see. So it's sort of a symbol that everybody can know.
Mm.
So if we go a little bit deeper, we're going to stack imagery with I Ching. So here is how the symbols look. It's important to like visualize the symbol. We all know the Tai Chi symbol. So it's, the drop of white and the drop of black make a circle. And in the white part, there is a black speck. And in the dark spot and the black spot, there is a white speck. So there is a binary of yin, which would be the black, and yang, which would be the white. But they each have a little yang and yin in each of them. So even in the binary, there is cross movement. You never have yin without yang. They
Mm.
must, form and formlessness must come together. So that's super important. In the I Ching, we don't necessarily symbolize it as this like Tai Chi symbol. It's a stack of 6 lines. Yang is a solid line, and yin is an open or broken line. And then we make a stack of 6 lines, and that is our hexagram. And then because what I'm kind of building here is just symbols and numbers, and they're stacking up, we're building images together. Another image that comes with all of these hexagrams is nature symbols. So within these little stacks, there are these little messages like the stop sign, right? It's like if you have 2 yangs and a yin, it makes a lake. If you have 2 yins and you have a yang, it makes a mountain. So you have all of these shapes of different natural forms coming together. So now we're building even more on this, a story of accretion, right? Now we have yin and yang, we have 6 lines, we have all these natural elements. Then, people could see these symbols and they could keep them with them. So you can unpack them if you wanted to or not. And for, thousands of years, there became these philosophical kind of Taoist teachings that came out of them, um, which to me is like this rich area of just, it's kind of holographic, right? What I'm explaining is very reflective, holographic. Everything means everything means everything.
Mhm.
So that kind of gives, I don't know if it makes sense what I've described so far, Cory, because I'm kind of describing a pictorial thing with language.
Yeah, I follow.
Cool. So what I did for us was I did a reading for Gemini season.
Oh, yay.
I wanted to kind of ask, for the collective, for all of us, like what can we work with during Gemini season? And you can go on to Google and figure out what the tossing is. I'm not going to describe what that is, but I tossed hexagram 23. And the name of that hexagram is called Stripping Away. And there is also a changing hexagram that goes with that. And that changing hexagram is number 2, which is Earth, which is the ultimate yin hexagram. It is all open.
Mm.
So I really felt like that's kind of speaking to that Jupiter and Mercury and Taurus energy, this earthy energy. Um, and also this like ability to have some generosity and receptivity. But stripping away is a symbol of pruning. And it looks like a tall mountain. It's all yin lines. So it's like open, like if you think about a stack of open lines, and at the top there's a solid line. So it looks like a big, huge mountain. And the idea of stripping away is that the mountain is stripped away to give fertile minerals to the valley. And obviously, this can feel like in our bodies, if we translate to our bodies what the mountain is doing, this is like being stripped of something. It can feel a little bit like you're being flayed or pruned to, it can hurt. There is there's a painful element to it. And so I also, in this reading, the changing line is line 6, which is the very highest line in the hexagram. And the little sort of riddle that goes with this line is a ripe fruit uneaten, noble one gets a cart, small people strip their huts. And I'm getting this from the I-Ching written by Hilary Barrett, by the way. And the advice is that the fruit is ready to fall painlessly. So it's kind of a gift of a line. It contains untouched seeds that germinate. So the noble one moves on freely and decisively away from old destructive patterns and into the field of possibility where potential can be realized. And small people find themselves immobilized by this old way of thinking and doing. And it's hard to imagine, that things could be different. So they might get stuck in this old fixed energy that we're talking about, holding court. But with this reading, there are all kinds of connotations around moving in spite of pain, or perceiving pain in new ways so that we can find movement, perhaps through that new moon in Taurus. And with all of that, T-square energy that we've been talking about, right? In spite of all of that. The line 6 is uneaten fruit is definitely a magical gift. And I think that is the magical gift of the chameleon that is Gemini, that can change its color. And we can utilize that. We can adapt and work in multiplicity and engage in the spirit of partnering, partnering with being kind of a twin energy Gemini symbol. And the shadow side would be that we shut down our curiosity and we remain in that fixed energy, stubborn, holding down, holding down the fort.
Wow. Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's actually I was a little nervous this is the first time I've done a collective reading, and I didn't want to pass on some bad news, but I do think this is like, not that Geminis are opposed to bad news,
Right.
But I do think this is an interesting way to think about the energy that we've been dealing with in the
Yeah.
sixth energy T square, and then bringing in this Gemini energy today.
Yeah. That actually is really spot on. And I know we weren't going to go into like the process of divination with the I-Ching, but there one of the things I really love when I play around with it is you you compare the hexagrams. You do two tosses, and
Hmm.
then you compare the two hexagrams that you tossed for, and by comparing them, you actually get to see which lines in the hexagram
Are
are
changing.
changing, and those are the ones that you actually read for.
Exactly. Yes.
And you can yeah, just even in the process of doing that kind of divination, it just feels fluid. It's not like you're reading a prescription and then a diagnosis and you said this, therefore that.
Hmm.
It's like you could, you could be there with the I Ching all day and just be like constantly having this sense that everything is like really slippery and in motion and could be approached and engaged with in all these different ways.
Hmm.
And for some people, that could be really exciting. And for some people, that could be really frustrating. But if that is something that is intriguing for you, um, there's a ton of resources, right?
Right,
Like
on
it's,
how to do the divination itself. It is a little bit complicated, but once you, like any kind of math that we learn, and it starts to come easier, because what you're doing is, it's all about number theory. So it's like tossing 6 times. Sometimes you have a changing line, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're comparing two hexagrams, and actually sometimes you just have one hexagram to look at. So it's there, the variables are just like statistics, or any kind of like, any kind of math, which is also
mm,
very Gemini as well, speaking in numbers. There's so much understructure to it that you can geek out about.
wow. Yeah, the understructure
Understructure.
is what makes it, yeah, makes it not just tolerable. I actually really enjoy working with the I Ching, and I find it that part of it really fun, that moving part, the
Hmm.
seeing the two things and how one can like morph or shift into the other. That's really cool. That's something that the way I practice like tarot anyway, which is very still rudimentary,
Hmm.
um it feels more static to me.
Yeah,
Not
and
in a bad way, but it just
yeah,
feels like it has spoken and I need to sit with that.
yeah, and
And yeah.
there is like a, to bring in the Jung word of synchronicity, like, it's like, this isn't about sequence, it's about cross feeding and relating, going between, and the movement moves between those two hexagrams.
And it doesn't get more Gemini than that. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jillian.
Thanks for having me.
I think we're going to go get some ice cream now
Yes, we are.
and maybe a drink and talk a lot more on this first day of Gemini season. Thank you for joining us. I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Bye bye.